Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, Hyphens Classics. As you can see, we're in front of the Series 1. So, yep, we're going to be talking about that. So in the last episode, we took the gearbox off the transfer case and the front drive off. We took it all apart. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive deep into the gearbox. I have to admit, that was a little bit nerve-wracking. Never taken one apart. You know, I come more from an IT kind of background, IT AV background. So taking gearboxes apart, I have worked on cars, but this was going to be interesting. I also did have some help along the way. Lots of forums on Facebook. I'm a member of the Land Rover Series 1 Club as well. You can always get good help from people, always lots of helpful people around. And I'll mention them through in this video. So when we took this apart, the gearbox apart, and put it back together, there were a number of little issues. So it was actually quite good that I did take it apart. And obviously we'll highlight those on the way. A couple of things that I managed to fix okay by myself. Again, a couple of things that I needed help with, but we'll mention those in the shot. The footage is again photographs for the most part. As we get through the rebuild of the gearbox, we do start to see some video. So what will happen is I'll just talk over it again, give you lots of information about what happened, what I did, how I did things to fix it, and hopefully you'll find this helpful. So sit back and enjoy the footage. Here it comes. With the gearbox, it's an aluminium casing, as you all know. And one of the problems that we all face with a lot of these parts is when you have a thread into a casing, whether it's aluminium or whether it's a cast iron block, when studs or bolts break, can be a real nightmare. So when I was taking this apart, down on the top here, if you can just see, I will also put some photos up, but down on the top you have the holders for the bearings that hold the Selector shafts in place. So there's a couple of bolts on either side that hold these in place, and one of these bolts had sheared off. So that was going to be a fun exercise to take apart. But luckily, I got a good friend, in fact, the guy standing behind the camera. Him and his granddad had some BSF, Whitworth, BA dies and taps, which have come in as a lifesaver throughout this build. So the first thing we did, held it in a clamp, got a drill, had all the drill bits, the right size drill bits, drilled a nice small hole through the broken off stud, and just slowly using different size drill bits came out till we were just inside the thread. Once we got it out, we managed to peel a few bits and pieces out, but then using the tap we managed to re-tap the thread and it was all good. So it's a bit scary to think about doing these things, but as long as you can get a good center start on drilling a hole, you'll be fine. If you start to go off center, then that's when you'll start to have issues. But it's nerve-wracking, but if you've got the right equipment, it can be done. Now that we've got the top cover off and out of the way, we're going to show you a few of the images, and I'm going to talk you through how this thing came apart. So as we can see here, we can see all the gear selectors. So closest to us, or near the bottom of the picture at the moment, you can see that'll be third and fourth in the synchro. Then in the middle, first and second, and at the top, reverse. Here, one of the things I wanted to point it out was the Selector bearings and the springs. So I've got them all in place here on the top, and as you can see, when you take this apart, you've got to be very careful that things don't fall off or roll around. You don't want to have ball bearings rolling around your workshop, or springs. So make sure you keep track of those. So to remove them, there's a little bit of fiddling, but if you try and get out the, now you're right, third and fourth, try and get that, so the very bottom one in the picture, that one's the one that'll come out first, then you take the first and second out, and then reverse will come out. You don't have to undo anything here, these will come out as they are. So just, again, a little bit of fiddling around, or fettling, and you'll get those things out. As you can see in this image, I've marked the shaft as to where the Selector is, because I did undo all of them just to make sure that the nuts were okay and the thread was good. Moving along, they're all out now, and we're looking into the gearbox. we can see the main shaft, and we can see the copper ring, which is the back end of your third and fourth synchro. But we'll get to the main shaft and what's in the gearbox a little bit later, because at first what we need to take off is the bell housing. So looking at the bell housing here, this is the diesel bell housing and the clutch housing. As you can see, this one's had a bit of an oil leak, but that's okay. It's all coming apart. It's all going to get replaced. So the first thing is there are 6, 7 nuts that you can see here that have to come off, and then that clutch housing will come away. As you can see here, it's out. We've taken some of the studs out as well, and at some point when I went through the changes, we removed the bearings from this just to check that everything was all right, and if any of the bearings were no good, they would have been replaced. Looking at the clutch housing that's out at the moment, again, this is a diesel one. So you can look at the bottom of this, you can see it's got a slight lump on the left-hand side there. Again, this was specific to the diesel model. This changed a bit over the years, as we may have mentioned earlier. Trying to get the bell housing off. So there's 4 bolts that hold it onto the gearbox. These are all undone. As you can see, I've used a rubber mallet just to give it a slight tap. It was quite gentle, just to break the seal and get things moving. Used a nice, thick, chunky pry bar, again, to help, but being very, very careful here, because the last thing I want to do is damage the mating surfaces, obviously, because this is what keeps the oil in. So we don't want to damage it. So again, if you're going to do this, very, very gentle. In the next image, we can see now that the gearbox is starting to separate, and we managed to pull it off quite easily after that. With the bell housing off, I'm going to now compare it to the earlier 80-inch or petrol, 1600 petrol bell housing. So we've got the diesel one on the ground here. You can see it. This is looking inside. Flip it over. This is the back side of it. And now I've got them together. So you can see the diesel on the lower end side of the picture, and the petrol, 1600 petrol, up the top. And you can see the differences in the starter motor housing. It's quite a lot bigger. Also, one thing you might note is that the petrol bell housing has a hole either side of the bell housing. Again, this was for ease of being able to create a left-hand drive or right-hand drive vehicle. Flipping them over, you can see as well, just not a lot of differences, to be fair, right? There's the pinion drive at the top, which will engage into the main drive, and then the bearing at the bottom for the lay shaft. So looking on the bench here, we can see the pinion shaft, the bearings, the lock tab washers that hold all the components in the bell housing. So all of these came out because obviously I wanted to check the bearings were good. I was going to change all of the lock washers anyway to make sure they were good and strong, and so everything came out. And also I noted when I had checked both the bell housings that some of the studs holding on the clutch housing were bent. So went through all of them and obviously used all the good ones. And if I didn't have enough, we replaced them. Right, out on the bench now we have the lay shaft. As you can see from this image, it was in good condition. No major concerns with that, which was always nice. Although when I put it back together, and obviously we'll get to that a little bit later on in this video, I had a little bit of fun with putting it back together, and it turned out that it was certain parts on the lay shaft that was causing my problem. Not that it was the problem of the parts, it was, me. I hadn't put things back together quite as well as I should have done, but we'll get to that in a minute. Looking back into the gearbox, we can see the main shaft still sitting in there. I've removed third and fourth gear synchro, and there are a couple of detent springs, or a few detent springs that hold the gears in place in the middle. And one of the common issues here is those springs snap or somehow become dislodged. Typically you'll lose third or fourth, or you'll find that you're driving along and it won't stay in third or fourth. Obviously not good having bits of little spring steel floating around your gearbox either. Here is the main shaft out. Now obviously to get this out, as you can see at the top of this, there's the main bearing housing that goes out through the back of the gearbox. There's a nice big massive circlip and other components to get this out. Takes a bit of brute force, and so one of the things that I forgot to mention earlier on in this is If you do need to change bearings, and there's a few little other components in here, you do need a press. I was quite lucky. My local garage just down the road were very, very helpful. They got a 30-ton press, and they did a number of bits and pieces of work for me when I was doing the gearbox, so pushing the bearings on and off, etc., etc. So now, again, we're looking at the image. We can see the main bearing housing on the back of the main shaft here. You can see there's just a locator pin. That's to stop the housing spinning around in the main gearbox housing. Obviously, you want the bearing to do the work. And now, taking apart this is the bush that sits on the main shaft, and this is one of the other common issues you'll get with, to be honest, a lot of the early gearboxes. Now, I do understand at some point in either the Series 2 to Series 3, this bush did become two independent pieces, but in the early ones, it was one piece. And as you can see here, this one's not too bad. It hadn't let go completely yet, but as you can see, there's a crack appearing in the bush. And here in the next image, I've got a little bit closer, you can see how that crack goes all the way around. And then in the next image, there's the locating notch in there, and you can see it's starting to get a little bit of damage on it. And we'll go into the next section and we'll just talk through why this happens and why you should replace this. Right, guys, I've been talking for quite a bit now, and I think what we'll do is we'll cut this one here. There's a lot to talk about with this gearbox, and I want to make sure you get all of the details and all of the issues that I had. We'll come back again in a week's time and we'll go through the rest of it. Please remember, like, subscribe, hit the bell. You'll get notifications of when the next video is out. See you next time, guys.